Imagine it's July in Georgia, 1924. The air is so thick you could carve it with a pocket knife. You've got a nickel in your pocket, one single coin, and you're standing in front of a wooden cooler filled with ice and glass. You aren't looking for a Coca-Cola. In this town, that's city water. No, you're looking for something taller, something brighter. You reach past the dark brown bottles and pull out a 12-inch towering glass of liquid neon, peach, orange, or maybe a grape so purple it looks like royalty. The label says, Nehi. For nearly half a century, this wasn't just a soda, it was an empire. It was the drink of the working man, the secret weapon of the rural South, and the brand that terrified the giants in Atlanta. At its peak, Nehi didn't just compete with Coca-Cola, it out-hustled them, out-innovated them, and quite literally, outgrew them. But today, if you walk into a grocery store in Seattle, Chicago, or even parts of the South, the shelf where Nehi once stood is empty. How does a billion-dollar empire simply vanish? How does the most popular fruit soda in American history become a footnote, a ghost brand relegated to antique shops and MASH reruns? The answer isn't just a business failure. It's a story of a soda war that turned into a legal bloodbath. It's the story of a man who started a revolution in a grocery store basement because he was insulted by a salesman. And most importantly, it's the mystery of how Nehi didn't actually die. It just put on a mask and changed its name to something you probably have in your fridge right now. This is the forgotten history of America's lost soda empire. This is how Nehi ruled the South and why the world let it slip away. Every great empire starts with a grudge. For Nehi, that grudge began in Columbus, Georgia at the turn of the 20th century. Meet Claude Hatcher. He wasn't a corporate tycoon or a chemist. He was a pharmacist working in his father's wholesale grocery business, the Hatcher Grocery Company. Now, the Hatchers were good at what they did. They sold everything a Southern family needed, and a huge part of their business was Coca-Cola. Back then, Coca-Cola wasn't the global behemoth it is today, but it was the big man on campus in Georgia. Claude Hatcher was moving thousands of cases of Coke. One afternoon, Claude sat down with the local Coca-Cola representative, a man named Columbus Roberts. Claude had a simple request. Look, he said, we are your biggest customer in the region. We're buying more syrup and more cases than anyone else. I think we deserve a small discount, a commission for our loyalty. Columbus Roberts didn't just say no, he laughed. He told Claude that if he wanted a discount, he was out of luck. He basically told him, you need us, we don't need you. That was the spark. That was the moment the mystery cotton began to spin. Claude Hatcher didn't get angry, he got even. He looked Roberts in the eye and made a vow that would change beverage history. I've bought my last case of Coca-Cola. Claude went straight to the basement of the Hatcher grocery store. He traded his ledger for a lab coat. Drawing on his pharmaceutical background, he began experimenting with ginger, sugar, and carbonation. He wasn't trying to make a better Coke, he was trying to make something different. His first creation, Royal Crown Ginger Ale. It was a hit. Local farmers and workers loved the kick. But Claude knew the real money, the black gold of the South, was in the cola market. By 1910, he released Chero Cola. For a few years, it looked like Claude was going to win. Chero Cola exploded in popularity. He had hundreds of bottling plants. He was the underdog taking a bite out of the giant. But then, the giant bit back. Coca-Cola's lawyers descended on Columbus like a swarm of locusts. They sued Hatcher, claiming that nobody else had the right to use the word cola. It was a legal battle that would last decades, but the initial blow was devastating. The courts ruled against Hatcher. He was forced to drop the word cola from his brand. Sales plummeted. The company was bleeding. Claude Hatcher sat in that same basement looking at a dying business. He needed a miracle. He needed something so unique, so bold that Coca-Cola couldn't touch it. And then he overheard a conversation that would give his empire its name. A route salesman walked into the plant and mentioned a competitor's bottle, calling it Nehi. Cloud's ears perked up. Nehi. It sounded tall. It sounded generous. It sounded Southern. In 1924, Nehi was born. But it wasn't just a new label, it was a strategy. While Coke was obsessed with their 6.5-ounce contour bottle, Cloud went bigger. He introduced a 9-ounce and eventually a 12-ounce bottle for the same price, a nickel. He didn't just give them more soda, he gave them more flavor. While the rest of the world was drinking brown syrup, Nehi was a rainbow: peach, grape, orange, root beer. By 1928, the Cherry Cola Company was gone. In its place stood the Nehi Corporation. The empire was ready to rise. But as the 1920s roared to a close, a shadow was falling over the country, a shadow that would kill thousands of businesses. But somehow, it would make Nehi a legend. Continuing our deep dive into the soda empire, we move from the basement lab to the neon-lit streets of the 1930s. This is where Nehi stops being a local favorite and starts becoming a cultural phenomenon. October 1929. The world broke. The Great Depression didn't just hurt businesses, it erased them. Families were counting every literal penny. If you had 5 cents, it had to count. Coca-Cola was the establishment. It was the standard. But in the 1930s, the standard was 6.5 ounces. When you're hungry and you're tired, 6.5 ounces of sugar water feels like a tease. Enter the Nehi strategy. While other companies were shrinking their portions to save on sugar and glass, Cloud Hatcher doubled down. He didn't just sell a drink, he sold a bargain. The Nehi bottle was famously tall, 9 ounces, then 12 ounces, all for the same nickel. In the South, there's an old saying, a Nehi and a moon pie is a working man's lunch. It wasn't just a snack, it was a survival kit. But Nehi didn't just win on volume, they won on vibrancy. If you've ever seen the movie A Christmas Story, you know the major award, the infamous leg lamp. Believe it or not, historians and pop culture fans often link that iconic image back to the original Nehi marketing. The brand name was Nehi, pronounced knee-high. To hammer that point home, the company released a series of advertisements featuring a woman's skirt hiked up just enough to show her stockings, with a bottle of Nehi standing next to her calf to show they were the same height. In the 1920s and 30s, this was scandalous. It was provocative. It was the sex sells of the soda world before that was even a concept. People stopped and stared at these posters. They talked about them at church. They talked about them at the barbershop. And while they were talking, they were drinking. By 1930, Nehi was available in 44 states. They had over 500 bottling plants. Cloud Hatcher's basement hobby was now a national powerhouse. But just as the empire reached its zenith, tragedy struck. In 1933, the visionary, the man who refused to be bullied by Coca-Cola, Cloud Hatcher, passed away. The company was left in the hands of his vice president, H.R. Mott, and Mott was a different kind of leader. Where Hatcher was a tinkerer and a chemist, Mott was a cold, hard businessman. He looked at the books and saw a problem. Nehi was famous for its fruit flavors, peach, grape, root beer, but Mott knew the mystery cotton truth of the soda industry. Fruit flavors are seasonal. Cola is forever. If Nehi wanted to truly rule the South and the world, they couldn't just be the fruit soda guys. They had to take the crown back from Coca-Cola. They had to go back to Hatcher's original dream, a cola that could stand alone. In 1934, the Nehi Corporation released a product that would change the trajectory of the company forever. They called it Royal Crown, or RC Cola for short. But they didn't just release it, they staged a revolution. Mott knew he couldn't outspend Coca-Cola on radio ads or billboards, so he did something radical. He invented the blind taste test. Decades before Pepsi started the Pepsi Challenge, RC Cola was doing it in the dusty streets of Georgia and Alabama. They would pour 3 cups, Coke, Pepsi, and RC. Time and time again, people picked the crisp, slightly less syrupy taste of RC. The momentum was unstoppable. By 1940, Nehi, now largely driven by RC, was the first company in history to use a celebrity endorsement on a massive scale. We're talking about the biggest stars of the golden age of Hollywood.
Think about that. Joan Crawford, the biggest star in the world, telling Americans that RC Cola was her favorite drink. Nehi wasn't just for the working man anymore. It was glamorous. It was high society. It was winning. But here is where the story takes a dark turn. Success breeds enemies, and in the soda world, the biggest enemy wasn't just a competitor, it was the law. Just as Nehi was preparing to go global, a series of catastrophic events, a mix of bad luck, corporate greed, and a literal sugar war began to pull the rug out from under the empire. And the biggest blow? It came from within the bottle itself. This is where the story shifts from a local success to a global revolution, and where the mystery cotton starts to unravel. We're entering the era of the space age and the secret weapon. By 1976, the Royal Crown Nehi empire was wounded, but it wasn't dead. Even with the Diet Right disaster, they were still the third giant. They had the loyalty of the South, a massive network of independent bottlers, and a brand name that screamed American classic. But in the world of high finance, a wounded giant is just a target. Enter Victor Posner. If you haven't heard his name, you should. Posner was the pioneer of the hostile takeover. He was the king of the corporate raiders. He didn't buy companies to grow them. He bought them to squeeze them like an orange until there was no juice left, then throw away the peel. Through his holding company, Chesapeake Insurance, Posner began buying up shares of Royal Crown. By the early 80s, he had a controlling interest. Now, if you're a soda lover, you'd hope the new owner would invest in marketing. Maybe bring back those iconic knee-high peach ads. Maybe fix the formula for Diet Right. Posner did the exact opposite. He looked at the Royal Crown knee-high balance sheet and saw a gold mine of cash that he could use to buy other businesses. Instead of spending money on Knee-High's flavor empire, he used the soda profits to buy Arby's. Yes, you heard that right. The money that should have been used to fight Coca-Cola and Pepsi in the 1980s was being funneled into fast food roast beef. Under Posner's leadership, the marketing budget for Knee-High was slashed to nearly zero. The research and development labs, the same ones that invented the soda can and diet soda, were gutted. But the real murder happened in the distribution. In the soda world, shelf space is king. If you aren't on the shelf, you don't exist. Coke and Pepsi began a scorched earth campaign. They told grocery stores, if you want our products, you have to give us the prime eye-level shelves. Because Knee-High had no marketing budget and no corporate support from Posner, the independent bottlers, the local guys who had been making Knee-High since the 1920s, began to starve. They couldn't compete. One by one, they were forced to sell out. And who was buying them? Usually, it was Coca-Cola or Pepsi. And the first thing those giants did when they bought a local plant, they stopped the Knee-High production lines. By the mid-1990s, the empire was a skeleton. The Knee-High name, once synonymous with Southern summer, was being relegated to nostalgia status. It wasn't a mainstream drink anymore. It was a specialty item. But here is where the story gets even stranger. While the Knee-High name was being erased, the soul of the company, the products themselves, were being traded like poker chips in a high-stakes game of corporate musical chairs. Through a series of mergers and acquisitions, the remains of the Knee-High Corporation ended up in the hands of Keurig Dr. Pepper. To the suits in a glass tower in Texas, Knee-High wasn't a legend. It was a legacy brand, a zombie brand. They didn't want to kill it entirely because it still had a cult following, but they didn't want to spend a dime to grow it. They did something much more calculated. They decided to keep Knee-High alive just enough to prevent anyone else from using the name, while slowly letting the public forget it existed. They stopped nationwide shipping. They stopped advertising. They turned a king into a ghost. But there's one question we haven't answered. The biggest mystery of all. If Knee-High ruled the South, why did the South let it go? Why didn't the people who grew up on peach and grape fight for it? The answer is hidden in a 1970s TV show set in a war zone and a secret identity that Knee-High has been using for years to hide in plain sight. By the late 1970s, the Knee-High Corporation was a corporate ghost. Its ads were gone, its bottling plants were closing. It should have been forgotten, buried under the neon blue wave of the Pepsi generation. But then, something miraculous happened. It wasn't a marketing campaign, it was a TV show. For 11 seasons, millions of Americans tuned into MASH, and there was one character, Corporal Radar O'Hara, who didn't drink whiskey like the doctors. He didn't want coffee. He wanted one thing and one thing only, a grape Knee-High.
It was the ultimate free ad. But it did something deeper than selling soda. It cemented Knee-High as the symbol of innocence. In the middle of a war zone, that purple bottle represented home. It represented the small-town American South that felt like it was slipping away. Suddenly, a whole new generation, people who had never even been to Georgia, were walking into stores asking for that radar drink. But when they went to the store, they couldn't find it. This is the tragedy of the forgotten empire. Knee-High had the greatest organic product placement in television history, and the owners, the corporate raiders we talked about, did nothing with it. They didn't increase production. They didn't launch a radar campaign. They let the fire burn out. But Knee-High didn't die. It did something much more clever. It went underground. If you look at the soda market today, you'll see brands like Sunkist and Fanta. They are the giants of the fruit soda world. But did you know that many of the original flavor profiles, the soul of what made Nehi Peach and Nehi Grape so legendary, were actually studied, mimicked, and in some cases swallowed whole by the competition? In the 1990s and early 2000s, the remnants of Nehi were tossed around between Dr. Pepper, Snapple, and Cadbury. Today, it sits in the portfolio of Keurig Dr. Pepper. But here is the mystery cotton revealed. Nehi isn't a national brand anymore. It's a regional heritage brand. There are still a handful of independent bottlers, the last Mohicans of the soda world, who have the rights to produce Nehi. They use the original recipes. They use the high fructose corn syrup, and sometimes real sugar for specialty runs. If you find a Nehi Peach today, it's like finding a relic from a lost civilization. It's not just a soda, it's a time machine. One sip and you aren't in 2024. You're back on a wooden porch in 1945, listening to the crickets and feeling the condensation on a tall glass bottle. So why did the empire fall? It wasn't because the product was bad. It wasn't because people stopped wanting fruit soda. It fell because it was too innovative for its own good. Cloud Hatcher was a disruptor before that word existed. He gave people more for their nickel. He gave them cans before they knew they wanted them. He gave them diet before they knew they needed it. But being first is dangerous. It makes you a target. Nehi was the scout that went ahead of the army and got shot so that Coca-Cola and Pepsi could see where the landmines were. Today, the big two rule the world. They have the billions. They have the Super Bowl ads. But they will never have the soul of the South. They will never be the drink that a soldier in Korea dreamed about. They will never be the Nehi bottle that stood taller than the rest. The Nehi empire is gone, but every time you open a can of soda, or drink a diet drink, or see a 12-ounce bottle for a bargain price, you are drinking Cloud Hatcher's legacy. The empire didn't vanish. It just became the foundation that everyone else built their houses on. Next time you're in a small town, in a dusty gas station off the beaten path, check the bottom shelf of the cooler. Look past the bright labels. You might just find a ghost waiting for you.